Hey everyone, Zach Storms here, one of the founders of Startup TNT, and I'm here with Arden Say, one of our local venture capital investors, and we're here to introduce you to a cool video project we've been working on for Startup TNT investors and anyone else that might be interested in learning more about life sciences companies.
Thanks, Zach. So, like other investors without technical backgrounds, it can be challenging for me to invest in early-stage life science companies, as they're quite different from the usual software startups that we see pitching for investment. What are the signs of traction? How important is intellectual property? What kinds of questions should we even be asking? We found that local stories about what the journey looks like for a successful life sciences company here are kind of lacking. So we often don't even know where to begin. Now, life sciences is a very broad umbrella, covers many different verticals: medical devices, therapeutics, digital medicine, just to name a few. While we can't talk about every life science vertical in one conversation, we are lucky enough to have access to a few local industry experts in the pharmaceutical drug development industry, who all have experience in successfully bringing a drug to market. And they've been kind enough to share their learnings with us. So today, we're going to watch and learn as two local venture investors, Christian and Yasmine, have a chat with John, Jamie, and Mark, who have backgrounds in commercialization, law, and chemistry, to talk about the kinds of things investors may want to look out for as they explore these kinds of companies. We hope you'll pick up some useful information that will help you ask better questions as you explore these exciting types of startups. And if there are other verticals you want to hear about, let us know. Perhaps we'll be able to do other shows on them as well.
And luckily for all you investors out there looking to support our growing life sciences sector, Startup TNT and Applied Pharmaceutical Innovation, along with many other partners, has a dedicated life sciences investment summit. Happens every spring in March, where all the companies pitching will look and feel specifically like the ones we're talking about today.
We'd like to thank the Edmonton Regional Innovation Network, Alberta Innovates, and Startup TNT for their support and sponsorship of this project, and hope you get some value from the conversation. So sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy.
So it's great to kind of sit down and have this conversation. We've got the cameras here, we've got a crew here, there's a bunch of lights behind us. But really, we want to talk about life sciences, right? Because there's kind of this mystique around investing in life sciences and what's happened. And, I've been looking at this for a while. Yasmine's been looking at this for a while. But, the three of you have had the opportunity to be in a business, grow a business, work in the different facets of it. And, it's really great to have this opportunity to hear your experience and kind of demystify, I think, a little bit about what that investor experience is coming in, the things they should know, and maybe ask about. And, we could start maybe right at the beginning, because the early stage investor is going to be looking at that very early bit of science, like that spark, that idea that gets someone to come in and say, oh, I've got an idea for a drug, or I've got the thing. And that probably happened somewhere along the way. Was there a spark? Was there a thing that kind of was like, eureka?
There can be. It depends on the situation, but it always starts with just an idea. Someone recognizes there's a need, a disease that needs to be treated, an opportunity. They have an idea about how to go after it, and you start doing some experiments. And I guess maybe the first little spark is when you test a new molecule in an in vitro or test tube non-animal type model, and you get a sign of activity. I mean, that's kind of the first place where you think, oh, we might be onto something here.
Yeah, I really agree with Mark. I think that what you're really looking for is a transition from that academic, discovery-based model of doing research, and then you transition the project into a more goal-based research, because ultimately you want it to be able to create a usable clinical product, and that's by design. It's not by accident. And I think Mark and we talk about this, and it's really when you get that animal model hit, and you understand that it has all the characteristics that it actually can affect a whole animal model.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really important point. It's great you get that first result in a test tube in a non-animal model that tells you you're on the right track. But until you put it in an animal and see it work, and in a perfect world, maybe 2 different animal models to verify that it's worked, then you really are much closer to having something.
So, Mark, in the work that you were doing, you see these results, you get an indication, and are you thinking at that point, or were you thinking at that point, hey, we can make this into a drug? Like we've got an opportunity, we can go after something here.
For sure. I think, again, once you have that animal data, that's giving you that confidence that we can make a drug here. But I think for scientists, you always think you have something, and so it takes people like Jamie and John interjecting and providing a different kind of expertise to allow you to really take that next step.
That brings up a really great point, because any of these companies, it's not just about the drug and the science and the lab work that has to get done. There's other components, and there's the business, right? This is ultimately a business, and you got to figure out what to do with this. And John, in the work that you were doing, Mark comes in with a great idea, right? So he's got a bunch of great test results, and he's got, I got the thing, but there's got to be a business case behind this, right? So what are the things that you were looking at that point in time?
Well, depending on what the experiments have proven out, somebody's chosen a compound, perhaps they've now chosen an indication in which they're trying to move it forward. So at that early stage, that's the time to start looking at, well, what's that marketplace look like? What else is out there? And where do we want to be? So it's kind of starting from the end and working your way back. So, what's the patient population look like? What does the reimbursement look like? What does, Jamie's IP strategy, how does that fit into all of this? And in some cases, it can be difficult to blend that business and science together, because typically, the very early stage companies are directed by research scientists that have decided that they're going to move this forward into a company and are not really thinking about the business aspects, but are more focused, as you would understand, on the science. So, we've
John has sucked the air out of the room more than once.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, it's John's absolutely right. I mean, for scientists, you always think you're right. There's an ego there. And it's not easy being told that, your idea is great, but there's no market there, or, there's something more you got to do. Yeah. And I know for myself personally, early on, that was a really hard lesson. And I think a lot of times it's not until you've gone through the whole process that you realize, oh, that business guy knew what he was talking about, or that IP guy knew what they were talking about.
Or at least that we have some questions to answer, right? We have,
Did that ever stop you from jumping across the table to throttle him?
I was out of reach. I knew at these kind of meetings to be at the other end of the table. But, and there's examples of that where, I know in one case, we some great science, some great experiments leading down a certain pathway. And I remember looking at the market situation and taking a look at doing a little deeper dive and finding, well, hang on, we're going after this indication, whatever it is, ABC disease, and finding out that there's 150 compounds out there in development for this. So it's very crowded space. Obviously, it's, worth a lot if there's that many people, but you have to then decide, is this worth actually going down? How are we going to be better? Are we going to be, more efficacious, less toxicity, better price, whatever it may be. But it's something you need to look at and not get wrapped up too much in the actual experimental data that you've provided yourself so far.
And at those early stages, as a scientist, you've been holding on to the whole briefing part, the creation of the indication. How do you know, as an investor, to trust the science versus the markets, and what parts of the team do we have to look at to know, yes, this is a viable business overall?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it comes down to you. I think you touched on it. The team. Is there a team in place, and more importantly, or just as importantly, is that team working together? Are they listening to each other? Are the scientists, willing to open their minds a little bit and listen to the business case, the IP case, the regulatory case? And, are the business guys, the regulatory people willing to listen to the scientists saying, no, this is the right way to go, and finding a path that makes sense for all the different disciplines?
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's really interrelated. You can really leverage one to the next. Like, if you can come up with, say, a specific assay that helps you in how you use that drug in the clinic, that's something that someone like John, someone who does a business, that's another SKU. That's another thing that you can sell. It makes you look more attractive. It's good for regulatory. It's good for the intellectual property strategy. So you can it can dovetail out to be a real asset for the company if everyone's working together and cooperating. Sharing in the pain.
Or the gain.
Or the gain, yes.
Usually both.
So that brings me to you, Jamie, because I remember in us chatting earlier about this. First thing for you when you came in is you wanted to talk to these two guys, right? Because in your world, when it comes to IP, you've got to stitch these things together now. You've got the science. There's all the work that's been done in there. You've got the business side of the puzzle, figuring out what are we going after, what markets are we going after, and now you've got this job of dealing with the patents, right? Stitching this together.
Yeah.
So for you in this circumstance, what was it you had to navigate in order to put these pieces of the puzzle together and kind of make this thing into a reality? Because this is the stuff that can make or break for a lot of companies.
Yeah. So the patents have to serve the project. It has to serve the corporation. And I needed to talk to Mark. I was very eager to talk to Mark when I first got onto the project, because I understood that there were certain aspects of the manufacturing that needed to be nailed down, because he would be defining the product in the market. And I knew that the patent had to cover that. So I needed to talk to Mark. And at the same time, I wanted to talk to John, because I want to know, what is the market? Who are the competitors? Where are they? What are they doing? And then it feeds back to Mark, because Mark would give me ideas on how difficult it is to manufacture it. And that would limit the number of people that would actually be able to compete. So it all, again, it's an interrelated web that, if you have the right people and they get along and they talk and they understand how to leverage their specific set of knowledge with another person's set of knowledge, then you can really grow something or create something that's really valuable, right? Not only as a clinic, but also as a business and, as a group, to be honest.
And there's probably a bit of keeping the end in mind here too, right? Because if you're going to make the investment to go all the way down, at some point, you're either going to market being the manufacturer of this, or someone's coming in and they're going to look at this portfolio, and this is when that other side of the business comes into place with like litigation and whatnot. So how was that a kind of a top of mind thing as you were going through it, or did that come up as you were going through it?
Well, every agent in Canada is trained that every patent strategy is actually a litigation strategy, and I know from past meetings that we have, I'm always thinking about, who are we going to go after? I make an analogy that a patent is an offense. It's actually a sword, that you have to sharpen up the sword. You have to create the right sword in order to defend the product. And that's a very tricky thing. And the truth behind it is that I am totally reliant on what these two people do to understand what to do. Because if I don't have data, I don't have a disclosure, which means I can't get a claim. So I remember going to Mark and asking him a gazillion questions regarding manufacturing. I went to other scientists, asking them about different aspects of the product, like the formulation, the drug's behavior itself in what was going on in clinic, so I could have a better understanding on what that end product was. So unfortunately, I think it's a little overlooked, because you actually have to think of these things very early on when you're still in the discovery phase. And that's hard for people who are new to this industry to understand.
It sounds like that defendability is really key for any strategy moving forward, whether it's IP, litigation, and so forth. When I was doing due diligence on a life sciences company, I had a wath of IP, patents in front of me that they had, filed, and they said this is our strategy moving forward. But I just went as a checkbox in my list and went on with my day. What really should have I been looking for in that due diligence?
Yeah, I think that what you're looking for is something that speaks to the market. That's the easiest way to look at it. If you look at it on a basis, from a market and your competitors. So in certain parts of biotechnology or medtech, you need to have a patent. So if it's a therapeutic, you need to have a patent in order to fend off generic competition. So the easiest way I would look at is, first of all, if they have just a whole bunch of provisional filings, then they're just really getting their act together. Those don't lead to a patent claim itself that's enforceable. So they need to actually go and solidify a patent strategy through regularly filed applications. But once they do that, the easiest way to look at it is basically to get them their patent counsel to download those patents to you, looking at the jurisdiction and the subject matter of each one, so that you understand the coverage around the country, around the world.
Yeah, I think some really valuable discussions I've had the opportunity to be in have been where we have everyone together at the table, like you were talking about before with the team, right?
Yeah.
And being able to bring these perspectives together to debate, right, the issues, to understand how do we bridge science and the business, the market side of the puzzle and the IP. And I found it was really interesting that the feedback that we were getting from patent counsel and some of the discussions really helped us think a little bit more critically about what paths do we then want to take with the science and the preclinical work that we were doing, and maybe shape a little more like what markets are we really looking at, or what kind of angles we were looking at, which is a really interesting interplay. And I guess when you reflect on that, that interplay in that time, like in that early stage, what are some of the takeaways or maybe the key lessons you came out of that period with, that really, have stuck with you and you're just the top of mind every time you go into something new?
I guess I'll go first. One of the things that surprised me when I first talked to Jamie, and it was a pleasant surprise, believe it or not, was Jamie.
There's a story there.
But Jamie's he's a lawyer, but he's also a scientist. And that was hugely valuable because he was able to understand what we were doing. He kind of understood the jargon that I had, but he was also able to feed back into the research we were doing. Some of the questions he was asking led me to think, we haven't thought about that. Maybe we should look at that. So there's a lot of value that can come out of that interaction. But again, it all comes down to being open to having that discussion, taking that feedback, and not being super defensive when someone's asking you those hard questions.
Yeah.
Willing to share. Right?
Yeah, willing to share.
And sit at the other end of the table. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, John, what about you in this scenario?
From my perspective, from what I was more interested in was back to Jamie's original point about jurisdiction, how long the patent's valid for. The jurisdiction, you have to basically look at that as, if this particular disease you're looking into, is it more prevalent in ABC country or continent than others? There's things like that. And there's also some significant things as you move forward throughout the development of the compound through the clinical stage, and as you get closer to market, is you have to determine then, all right, well, where are we going to file first? Because that'll have a significant impact on pricing, because there's reference pricing going on, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole art to all of that as well. So those are the things that, from my end, I was interested in talking to Jamie about, where are we going to patent for, what are we going to patent and why? So yeah, there's a lot that comes up at the end stage there that makes a big difference in taxes. It makes a big difference in market access and reimbursement, and yeah, it's a lot of work to consider. But you need to again start at the end, work your way back. Where do you think this might be, most valuable, and what can you do to achieve that? So, yeah.
Was there ever a moment where you felt like you were smashing Mark's dreams too badly?
No. No, because not looking at.
I might have felt differently.
Yeah. No, not so much. Not within those topics. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Mark didn't really care about where we filed or launched or whatever. He was more concerned about making something that Jamie could work with and get a patent or make sure it's defendable.
And that becomes your problem in that circumstance.
Yeah, so, as much as I am not a chemist, Mark is a very good chemist. So I was constantly going to him to understand the chemistry of the molecule and, how does it made? How is the scale up? Did we have to change anything? There's a lot of questions that come from that. And then, sales and marketing in biotechnology, there's an art to it, as John was suggesting. Like you have to think about your regulatory rollout in combination with, your distribution. And I need to be able to coordinate the patents with that. So, if we don't have a patent yet issued in that jurisdiction, it's probably not a great idea to start, rolling it out the distribution in that country. So that has to be coordinated. And in fact, I opened my files up to John, and I could actually, in the organization which we were in, I could actually look at the experiments that Mark and his group had done. So I could actually look at everything to help myself understand what to do next. And we would just meet. We would meet informally, and we'd meet in directors' meetings, and we would just work it out.
So we've talked a lot about the beginning of this stage, putting your drug to trials and going through the IP process. You've got the scientists, you've got the market research, you have the package there. And I'm not going to lie, your time sounds expensive already. So how does an early stage company go about funding that process up till this point?
Okay. Well, I think typically what you'll find is, in the therapeutic device kind of area, what you'll find is a lot of that is from grants. So the very early stage work's funded. The discovery phase type work is typically funded through grants.
Right.
And you can go as far as you want or as far as you can. Keep applying. Keep trying to raise money through non-dilutive financing, I guess. And then you actually end up like any other business. You have to perhaps bootstrap it yourself. You have to look to angels. You have to look to foundations. There's various related foundations, cancer or heart or whatever. And there's also, in many cases, for the very early stage, you can find some philanthropic investing. Somebody has a particular interest in a disease that may be struck close to home for them or something, and they're willing to help out. So that's really how the early stage gets done. And as you move forward, of course, the dollars become, a lot larger.
That's kind of a fairly unique mix each time, right? Because you get different, communities around these diseases, whether they're, very common or rare. You get different interests even from, government, right? Like there's different health issues or social issues that might be tied into it. So it's interesting because I think from what I've seen, it's a little bit of a complicated piece of the puzzle that you have to navigate. But, if you're able to thread that and kind of move things forward meaningfully.
Yeah, I think, what you're really doing at the beginning is you're trying to coalesce around a product. So you're trying to build a company around a product, and you want to be as efficient as possible so that you do leverage, especially your grant, your non-dilutive funding, because you want to be an investable company. And to do that, you need to basically invest then in things like intellectual property, into regulatory opinions, clinical trial, basically pathways. You need to have a market analysis. You should have a business plan. So you're really trying to build a structure that is financeable. And that's, I think, key. And I think that's what John in particular has really emphasized and taught me in my career, right?
Yeah. Because as you progress, the needs are going to grow. The financial needs are going to grow significantly, right? And so you have to be building up everything behind that internally to support moving forward in that direction. That means your team has to expand. You have to find expertise, either outsourced or bringing in internal, et cetera, et cetera. And so, obviously the scrutiny gets, much more difficult as the funding goes up. Only makes sense. So,
and Jamie mentioned something there about you're building your business around the product, and you've got this development plan, obviously with the clinical trials and what's next to come for the molecule, what you're trying to provide value for. That's quite analogous to software investors with a product roadmap, what we would be looking for from MVP all the way to full deployment and later stage iterations of their software. Is that a fair, bridge to cross over into the other world?
There's certainly a number of similarities. I think the one thing that's perhaps different in life sciences, whether it be diagnostic, device, therapeutic, is it's a highly regulated market, and it just takes a lot longer to get to market. Whereas, with other, apps or something, if you're doing good and you're ready to go, you can get in right away, but you still have to look at it the exact same way. So the development plan has to be based on a whole pile of research that every department kind of puts in. So it's got to be the clinical, the regulatory, the chemistry, manufacturing, the IP strategy, the market. All of that has to blend together, and it should give you a general understanding of where you need to do, or what you need to do to move forward. And also, you should tie that into like a timeline. So you should have milestone timelines mapped out, like, okay, we can get all this done by here, and then as soon as we're done all that, we can move on to get all this done by here. So you've got generally speaking, development plan, very similar.
And that development plan is hugely important.
Oh, yeah.
Like John mentioned, it's a highly regulated environment, and that kind of helps you build out that plan because it's laid out for you to get into a phase 1 study. There are certain pieces of data and information you have to have. So that is the basis of your development plan. And to have an effective development plan, you need input from all these different scientific and business disciplines and clinical and so forth. In terms of raising money, that plan is going to dictate how much money you need. And I think early on for us, until you've gone through it, you don't really know how much money you're going to burn through. So if you have a solid plan, I think that's setting a really good foundation.
And just to drill down on the plan as well, is there a way for an investor to ask the question of how have you stress test this product and its plan going forward? Are there ways for us to peel back the veil in that regard, maybe?
I think if I was asking that question, I would be really curious to understand a little bit about their regulatory expertise. Because as we were just talking about, the regulatory pathway is what that development plan should be geared to deliver on. And if you don't have a quality regulatory person or team in place, I'm going to look really hard at that development plan. Jamie?
Yeah, I think it's key. When you talk about approval, you have to have people who understand regulatory and understand how to deal with the problems in it. And, all of it has to sort of align. So I'm always in meetings, I'm very conscious about the expiry date of the patents, because I need to know if we actually need to go find a dovetail to extend the life of the product. And if that has to happen, I got to go talk to Mark again, because its data allows me to make that second filing. Data equals patent equals claims. And it's not always there, and it's an added expense because you're doing more research. So it all has to fall together. You can manage it, but it has to be managed. That's the key. Managed by people who know what they're doing, right? And can talk to each other and figure out what to do next.
Yeah. And you mentioned stress test too, because there's another part of that kind of falls more into perhaps Mark's lap, but the idea of actually stress testing your idea, the compound. Have you done, are there numerous experiments that you've done to actually prove that this works? Or have you just done a little bit and you go, yay, it's working? If you really dig in, and I think it's stress testing the compound and for the indication is super important as well. Make sure there's a lot of work done on that front.
For sure, it's especially early stage research. It's really easy to fall in love with your invention, and you have to be willing to look at it critically and listen to the data, and be prepared to say maybe this isn't going to work, or what do we have to do to make sure this works.
Right.
So it's that awareness of not believing you're the smartest guy in the room and you've got everything sorted out. You got to kind of follow the data and keep testing it. Keep asking questions.
Yeah, I think that's legal counsel's dream, is actually someone who does that, because then I have so much more ammunition to understand what it is and to protect it. Yeah,
it's a hard thing to do early on if you don't have a lot of money, though, because that means every experiment you do is costing money. So there's a balance there, but you've got to be able to look critically at your own work.
So I guess it sounds like really it's almost, if we strip it back for a second, it's almost like any business, right? You're looking for that product market fit. Do they have a plan? Do they understand the realities of the business that they're walking into? Are they adaptable, right? Like to your point, are they adaptable? Like sometimes there's a moment where you've got to make a pivot. You've got to look at something different. Maybe you got to apply the compound to a different indication or something like that, right? So
happens all the time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that you can't get away from basic business. I'm going to leave that to John. But the thing is do you have the people that have the ability to understand what to do next in the face of what looks like a huge brick wall? And you don't want to hit any wall. And there's a lot of walls that get hit because it's biology. It's difficult to understand. It's not an engineered product. It's a product of biology. You're going to hit some walls. The trick is to glance off the wall and not hit it at 90 degrees. So,
which also happens all the time.
Which can happen, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it does sound that foundational, the team is really what anchors the business and moving forward, the success and the value of what you've put out into the world. Without a functioning, coachable team that is pivotal, there's really nothing for growth, success going forward.
These are such complex projects. It's unrealistic to expect that one person understands all the different aspects of it. It's the team has to be not only really good at what they do, but really good at working together and listening to each other and developing together.
I think, Yasmine, to kind of bring it back to the point we started with, some of these fundamentals are still the same. We're always looking at the team, we're looking at the plan, we're looking at product market fit, we're looking at the opportunity. If all of these things work out well, it's a sign of a more positive, potential investment for someone.
Absolutely.
Than a situation where none of those things, or maybe very few of those things, are together. Yeah. So that's I think maybe an important foundation for everyone to come away with on that.
Definitely. And just to bring it back to that funding piece as well, understanding as an early stage investor, getting in at the very, beginning of product market development and in all of these stages, preclinical or just post preclinical trials, what are some of those exit or opportunities? What does that look like for an investor at that stage? What can I expect if I'm getting into a company? Show me behind the door.
Loaded question. Well, Jamie will tell you it needs to be engineered, your exit. But just to kind of throw a little bit of light on, I'm going to use some numbers that can vary drastically for a multitude of different reasons, but generally speaking, at development, something's usually valued in that, $3, $4, $5 million range. They get to phase one. Now you're looking at a value of something in and around $100 million. Okay. You get to phase two. Now you're looking at something that's in the neighborhood of $300 million. And then if you happen to get to filing, you're looking at something that's going to be in excess of $1 billion. Very general numbers, but if you think about it from the early stage to even, phase one, there's a significant multiple there. Yes. So, if that's where you're interested in investing in and willing to exit at, then obviously, given everything else is working okay, you've got a good team and you got a good compound, everything else, they can do quite well.
Let's maybe dial in on the clinical trials piece, because a lot of people will have heard the term clinical trials, right, but maybe have no idea what a clinical trial is and what's the difference between a phase one and a phase two and a phase three. And I think even for an investor, understanding that lingo, right, and then trying to pair up, what's my exit point and understand that part. When we look at that, what are we really talking about here? Because we were talking about preclinical before, and now we've hit that point where we're putting something into a person. What are we really talking about in terms of how we conceptualize these exit points and phases?
Well, I think you're looking at de-risking all the way through. It's a de-risking exercise, really. And as Mark, I think you mentioned earlier, for example, generally speaking, phase one is safety. Generally in small number of people, we just want to make sure that we can give this to healthy individuals and nothing bad happens. And hopefully you can tease out some additional data on there. As you move into two, you're now looking to continue to monitor safety, but you're also now beginning to measure efficacy. And so they'll be playing with different doses. There'll be all kinds of things that they'll have to do in a phase two. And then ultimately, if you get into a phase three, now we need to test all those hypotheses and everything that we've learned, develop a clinical plan in phase three, and you'll be required to do that in a much larger population. And if you meet all those criteria, you can send your paperwork into, the health regulators and hopefully get an approval. Yeah.
At each one of these stages, kind of like anything, the number of companies making it through those hurdles starts to change, right? There's a step change down in each of those, right?
Right. Yeah.
So maybe, John made the point that you would say engineer the exit, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. What is that? How do you engineer the exit, knowing kind of a little bit about the trials and what that stands for, and where the exits and the de-risking piece? What does that mean to engineer the exit?
So you can't run away from your data, right? You have the data you have. That's mainly going to be a product of how you design your trials. So one of the things that I learned from these guys is that you can actually design the trial to forecast what's going to happen in the next. So you design your one so it forecasts what you're going to get two. You take your two and you forecast it, what's going to happen. You design it so it forecasts what's going to happen in your three. That's the best way of looking at it. And if you do that properly, then if you're going to actually go to license or you're going to go to sell or whatever transaction you're looking for, you have a basis by which you can actually justify your ask. And the other thing is you have to understand what your investor pool wants, what your investors want. If they have a different view of what their goals are in the investment, you should be aware of that. Now, the issue usually is in biotechnology is that it's so inventor run, let's put it that way. It's very difficult for someone who's never done transactions to understand that these are how to actually structure the transaction so it works, right? When you go to grad schools, they don't give you a course in finance and you're doing immunology. I don't know why, but they don't. So
maybe you should encourage them.
Yeah. New course.
A new course in environmental immunology. But that's really where that team aspect comes in again, because it like Mark said, no one person can hold all of this in their head. It's just too difficult. So, John goes out, he charms everyone, and then he leaves this mess in front of me that I have to root through and make sure it can work. And then I have to go talk to Mark to make sure that, does our manufacturing distribution agreements, do they work in this? Like, he has to tell me more about what's going on. And, I think that's the main thing I did at certain times when we were working together is I would take something that was being negotiated, and then I would immediately speak to different groups to see if I could structure it. So,
yeah, and I just want to circle back. Jamie mentioned clinical study design. It's so hugely important. And again, there's lots of drugs out there that died because of a poorly designed clinical trial.
Not the drug themselves.
Not the drug. It was bad study design. So again, we keep coming back to team. If you have a really solid group that's doing your clinical trials, that can be hugely important. And John was mentioning phase 1 study is primarily about safety, but in a lot of cases, you can glean a little bit of information about whether the drug is going to work or not, how it works. And so in terms of de-risking, that's huge. Not only have you proven it's safe, but you've got some pretty good indications that it's going to work. And so I would place more value on the data from a study like that than one that
just proves that it's safe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that to do those analyses, though, you need some people who really know what they're doing, right? People
Absolutely.
who understand, how to do the statistical analysis on it, how to look at it in a clinical trial setting. So,
and just to connect the dots, it sounds like you've got your, each clinical trial basis is a new step function in value, which is coming back to where your exits could potentially lie.
Absolutely.
And so for an investor coming in at any one of those stages, it's interesting to think that the liquidation event or transaction, when you actually want to get your money back in return to your pocket, can happen at any one of those. You don't need to necessarily ride it out to the end.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Can you speak a little bit more to that process?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't think too many people really think about investing in therapeutic life science and willing to wait around for 10 to 15 years to get their money back. So, because that's usually the time frame that you're looking at, right? And of course, there's additional risk as you go along, although that gets de-risked as you progress. But no, certainly there's lots of opportunities, particularly because life sciences requires a significant amount of funding. So there's going to be, on average, I'm going to say, 4 to 5 at least significant funding rounds to get towards the end. So investors can choose to exit at any one of those whenever they're happy with their return.
But I think the key is that the company needs to know what the investor wants, because they won't they will not seek the right deal, or they may not know to seek the right deal, which is really the key in it.
And that's really some dialogue back and forth, right? If you're an investor coming in, you want to be able to have that dialogue to say, look, I'm here for this period of time, or maybe this period of time, but not necessarily forever. And the company also, right, probably rightfully so, would have to be thinking about, are we looking to be taken out by a strategic investor? Are we looking to take this all the way? There's different considerations, drawing back to the development plan. So I think this is really kind of, brought a few key things to the table that I think we've all kind of circled around. And maybe number one is team, right? Like, team seems to be like this important piece of the puzzle. And you may not have all the team day one, but you're going to acquire that team. I mean, you guys let this guy in eventually. So.
Unfortunately for them.
Exactly, yeah.
And once we had him in, we couldn't get him out.
I just dug in there.
and now he's just part of the fold, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You got your team, that's important, obviously, having a plan, right? Being adaptable, knowing the exit points, that communication with the company back and forth. I mean, these are all really, I think, interesting and compelling points that everyone should keep in mind.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to what you said about, you may not have the whole team in place, depending on the stage you're at, but you got to be in a place where you understand that you don't have the whole team and you are going to need to bring more people in. If you have the attitude that, I'm going to do it alone, I'll figure it out, to me, that's a flag. It's, again, that openness to bring in the right people at the right time, depending on where you're at in your plan.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the issues are regarding, finding that right person at the right time, creating that company that's attractive for that person to come to, with an asset that's attractive for that person to work with. That's really the key. And you can start that from day one. If you just start off on the right foot, and as Mark says, you realize that I'm doing this for this reason. I'm building a company. I'm building an asset. It's not just about me. I have to share this with other people.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Well, look, John, Mark, Jamie, Yasmine, this has been a fantastic discussion. Really appreciate us getting around the table and, having these cameras and lights all around us. But it's been really great. I think folks have probably come away with a lot of learnings about investing in life sciences.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, it's been
Awesome.
fun. Absolutely.
I'm just going to have a sip of my water now.
There you go. And so, Mark, is it true? I heard a rumor. Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here. I heard a rumor you got a lab named after you in Switzerland at a particular manufacturing facility.
It's a vicious rumor.
I heard there's actually video and photographic evidence.